So friends, welcome to the lecture series on debates in Indian politics. Debates in Indian politics. So we are going to the final reading of the module 1, which was about the question how to understand the Indian state. So there were several interpretations of the Indian state we have come across. We had seen Rudolf and Rudolf interpreting the Indian state, Sudipta Kaviraj, Partha Chatterjee, Sunil Kilnani. Today's lecture, friends, we are going to talk about a very radical interpretation about the idea of India. We are going to talk about Perry Anderson, and his book, The Indian Ideology. And friends, the book Indian Ideology, as I told you, is written by Perry Anderson, who was a British essayist and intellectual who is working in University of California. And Perry Anderson is the brother of the famous political scientist Benedict Anderson, who had written something about nationalism, which you may know. Nation as an imagined community. So Perry Anderson, is basically a historical sociologist, intellectual historian, and cultural analyst. And he is the real force behind the famous British bi-monthly magazine New Left Review, the very famous British intellectual magazine. He is the real force behind that magazine. And the book under our discussion, Indian Ideology, was written published in the year 2012. It is a very small book, 184-page book. It was originally published by Three Essays Collective. That's an Indian publisher based out of New Delhi. They publish only critical essays. And friends, in this book, Perry Anderson presents a very different interpretations about the very idea of India. And in this book, overall, when we talk about this book, Perry Anderson was very critical of M.K. Gandhi and his role in the Indian independence movement. And specifically, Anderson criticized Gandhi for injecting a religious element into Indian national movement for mobilizing the masses. And partition, which according to Perry Anderson was a creation of an unnecessary creation which could have been avoided. That is what Perry Anderson argued, which could have been avoided if properly approach the issue with due care. And partition, according to Perry Anderson, this book was a decision of the Hindu-dominated Indian National Congress. The phraseology is very important because he criticized Indian National Congress as a political actor which was basically dominated by Hindus. And friends, in an essay to Praful Bidwai, Perry Anderson opines that his book runs through five main arguments. What are these arguments? First, in this book, His first proposition is that Indian national movement has proposed, particularly Nehru, and Nehru's discovery of India has presented an India which was vaster than the Gupta dynasty or Maurya dynasty or the Akbar dynasty, which was vaster than all these three pan-Indian empires which the Indian history had seen. And also, discovery of India as well as the Indian national movement presented a myth that India has a civilization which has a continuity for almost 6,000 years, which you can see in the book Discovery of India. And he said that idea is erroneous, and that idea is historical, and that idea is drafted with poor historiography. That is the first argument in this book. Second, he criticized Gandhi for injecting religious element into the Indian national movement for mobilizing the masses. And third, the primary responsibility for partitioning the Indian subcontinent into India, independent India and independent Pakistan lay not with the British Raj, but it lays with the Indian National Congress. That was his most controversial argument in this book. And fourth, he argued Nehru's legacy in the freedom movement as well as the idea that modern India was created by or built by Nehru is ambiguous, and intellectual historians have given unnecessary importance to the legacy of Nehru. And lastly, the fifth point. Indian democracy, as it is argued, is not contradicted by caste system, but rather it has enabled the Indian democracy. So all these arguments, you see, these arguments are not acceptable to our common sense, because if India was hasn't that composite culture, multi-plural culture, which has a continuity for more than 6,000 years, friends, the idea of India will not survive. And even after 77 decades, the idea of India has survived, and the idea of Nehru has survived, the idea of Gandhi has survived, and caste is still a problem in Indian democracy. And all these, these are all arguments based on his own interpretation of some key books. Let us see, friends, the first chapter of this book. We are going to talk about only the first chapter. The first chapter is about independence. Friends, it is about independence. And this book, Perry Anderson, the first chapter, that is independence. There is only 3 chapters. The first chapter is independence, and there is partition and then republic. And the first chapter, independence, Anderson begins with a quote from Jawaharlal Nehru's book, famous book, The Discovery of India. And let us see what it is. That was taken from Discovery of India, page number 38, 40, 47 and 50. It's a very highly footnoted book. For every sentence, he has clear references. These are not simply his own polemics. Rather, he has clearly referred all these ideas, and he has begun this essay like this. Astonishing thought that any culture or civilization should have this continuity for 5,000 or 6,000 years or more, and not in a static or unchanging sense, for India was changing and progressing all the time. Marveled the country's future ruler, A few years before the coming to power, there was something unique about the antiquity of the subcontinent. And its tremendous impress of oneness. That word is very important because that word is put in single inverted comma. The tremendous impress of oneness, that for 6,000 years Nehru was arguing in his discovery of India that India has a tremendous impress of oneness, that India had a unity for 6,000 years. That's what in this paragraph Perry Anderson has put in single inverted comma, tremendous impress of oneness, making its inhabitants throughout these ages distinctly Indian. That sentence is also put in single inverted comma by Perry Anderson. Throughout these ages, distinctively Indian. That for 6,000 years, the people living in the area beyond the Hindu Kush mountain were having unity and oneness throughout these years, these decades, these centuries, and they had felt the need to feel the Indianness. That is what Nehru argued in the discovery of India. With the same national heritage and the same set of moral and mental qualities, he mused. Indeed, a dream of unity has occupied the mind of India. Indeed, a dream of unity has occupied the mind of India since the dawn of civilization. Nehru is arguing in Discovery of India, page number 38, 40, 47, 50. Nehru is arguing. Perry Anderson quotes Jawaharlal Nehru in the book Discovery of India, from his book Discovery of India, and saying that, Nehru had a dream of unity has occupied the mind of India since the dawn of civilization. The Nehru's paragraph is like, the core idea is like this. People beyond the Hindu Kush mountain lived here for 6,000 years. And it was not a single homogeneous culture. It was a composite culture of an assortment of various cultural identities, linguistic identities, religious identities, regional identities. So India was, from time immemorial, was plural. That was what Nehru argued. And not only that, for 6,000 years, people who occupied this land area, this landmass, this vast landmass called the Indian subcontinent, had a mind that they felt the need to be united. They felt the need to be united. And they had a feeling of oneness. And that oneness, a feeling of oneness had been here, existed since the dawn of the Indian civilization. That is what Nehru argued. And Perry Anderson is problematizing this very paragraph by Jawaharlal Nehru because he is questioning the historiography used by Nehru, whether there was an idea called India for centuries. These are the issues that Perry Anderson is raising in this essay called Independence. And friends, Anderson says, in a patriotic reveries of this kind, that so many people have written so many things about India like this. And it started with Nehru. Nehru was the first to propose a very authentic and very appealing and very distinct kind of an argument about India and its past in Discovery of India. So a patriotic reverie of this kind. Today's admirers of Nehru, even some of his critics, are not to be outdone. That so many writers have written like this. For example, for Meghna Desai, there are many books like this, friends. For many books like this in the genre of Nehru's Discovery of India, and Perry Anderson has quoted all those books. Perry Anderson has quoted all those books in this essay. And for example, he has referred The Rediscovery of India by Meghna Desai. That was also a book in the genre of Discovery of India. The title, The Rediscovery of India by Meghna Desai. Or Ramayendra Guha has written a book in the genre of Nehru's Discovery of India titled India After Gandhi. And Pradhav Bhanu Mehta, has a famous Indian political scientist and Indian intellectual, has written something of the same genre titled The Burden of Democracy. And friends, Amartya Sen, has written The Argumentative Indian. And Sunil Kilnani, and the first chapter we had, first introduction we had already discussed. Sunil Kilnani has written The Idea of India. The Idea of India. And Ramendra has again written The Makers of Modern India. He had identified almost 16, almost 20, I think, has writers who created the idea of India. And these are some of the books Perry Anderson referred in this essay, which, according to Perry Anderson, are belonging to the same genre or same genre of literature, which glorified a past with continuity, with a subsequent change, where people had a feeling of oneness for centuries. And you can also find books that criticize this notion. For example, if you read India, An Area of Darkness by, the famous Indian Nobel laureate, V.S. Naipaul, you will find something, a different kind of interpretation. Or in your module second, there will be another book which you will study in your module second, written by Sanjeev Sanyal, The Indian Renaissance. So you will get a different idea of India. Vis-a-vis this type of genre. So, friends, Anderson is very critical of this type of literature. And, for example, he has extensively quoted the sentences of all these writers. For example, Meghna Desai saying, the success story of modern India is nothing short of a miracle. That is what Meghna Desai has written about India, the success story of modern India in combining unity with the diversity is nothing short of a miracle. That was written by Meghna Desai in the Rediscovery of India, page 12 of the preface. Ramendra Guha has famously written, the humdrum manifestation of the miracle of India crinkles in its very banknotes. Look at Guha's beautiful sentences, Actually, Guha is a wordsmith. Look at the coinage he has done. The humdrum manifestation of the miracle of India crinkles in its very banknotes. So that was, written by Ramendra Guha in Outlook magazine, 31 January 2021. A nation consumed by the state. That was article titled, A Nation Consumed by the State, in the Outlook magazine, dated 31 January 2021. Or Pradap Bhanu Mehta, the famous Indian political scientist. Pradap Bhanu Mehta declares, which Perry Anderson has quoted in this essay, Indian democracy is a leap of faith. Indian democracy is a leap of faith for which there was no precedent in human history. look at the phrases they are coining. Is a leap of faith for which there was no precedent in human history. That was declared by Pradhan Bhanu Mehta in his book, The Burden of Democracy, page number 1. And Amartya Sen also says the same thing which Nehru said about India's past, that independent India became the first country in the non-Western world to choose a resolutely democratic constitution. A resolutely democratic constitution. Amartya Sen, Argumentative Indian, page number 12. So you will see so many writings like this, that's why Anderson says that was the reason why these writers means these books are The Rediscovery of India, India After Gandhi, The Burden of Democracy, The Argumentative Indian, The Idea of India, The Makers of Modern India. These types of genres, literatures, has the idea that Nehru was the builder of modern India and who created the India of what it is today, in which we are living with a constitution, with liberty, with rights and other kinds of, what may be called modern amenities of life. And it was a creation of Nehru. All these things we enjoy are a contribution of Nehru's imagination. Therefore, he was saying that the genres like rediscovery of India, India after Gandhi, the burden of democracy, the argumentative Indian, the idea of India, and the makers of India. These genres has presented a portrait of Nehru in the hearts and minds of his countrymen is George Washington, Lincoln, Roosevelt, and Eisenhower rolled into one. That is what Barry Anderson, talks about Nehru's legacy being created by these genres. That Nehru himself, in the hearts and minds of his countrymen, is George Washington, Lincoln, Roosevelt, and Eisenhower rolled into one. Right. So, friends, Anderson says all the countries have formed images of themselves. If you go to America or Australia, New Zealand, or South Africa, or no matter where, friends, all the countries in the world have formed images of themselves and they try to find out their ancestry. They try to find out their ancestry in the ancestry centuries away from its present. And big countries inevitably have bigger heads than others. So if you go to China, China finds its roots in BC. If you think about India, India always try to find out its roots in BC. Right? So all countries have their formed images of themselves, and India too have its own formed images. And of course, India's formed images goes back to centuries old history that India claims to have. And friends, and these types of cornucopia of claims is the standings of their authors, national authors. These types of images, formed images a country will have is the creation of its national authors. And of course, considering India, this type of formed images are created by the national writers of India. That's why you will have the books like Rediscovery of India, India after Gandhi, The Burden of Democracy, Pratap Bhanu Mehta, The Argumentative Indian, The Idea of India, Sunil Kilnani, or The Makers of Modern India, Guha. These books are either critical or, either casual or uncritical. These books are not critical about India. But these books, Anderson agrees that these are eminently serious studies about what the idea of India is. Very serious studies. These are very scholarly books, that he has no disrespect to these books. And these books are very important books if you want to really understand what the idea of India is. So you should read these books, because these are very important books. If you really wanted to understand what the idea of India is, you should come across these books. And he has no objection towards that fact. And friends, but he has an objection to one thing, that telegraphically speaking, that the word he used. Perry Anderson is also what may be called a wordsmith like Ramendra Guha. They invent so many vocabularies which will have a technical meaning. So here again, he uses a technical word, telegraphically. Telegraphically, he is trying to pinpoint the core themes of these books. And what are the core themes of this book? These books present an idea of India this way. And what is the way? Antiquity, continuity. What is that? India has an antiquity and it has continuity. Diversity, unity. That all these genres, literatures, proposes that India has diversity, and in that diversity, India maintains unity. And third, massivity, democracy. What is that? India is a massive country, big country with a lot of people and with a very big land mass. And in that land mass, we are practicing democracy. And friends, what exactly is the reality of India? What exactly is the reality of India? Because these cannot be considered a true picture of what the idea of India is. And he is problematizing the writings of these writers, right from Jawaharlal Nehru. And what exactly is the idea of India? So we have discussed Sunil Kilnani's idea of India, or post-colonial or subaltern writers like Sudipta Kaviraj presented an idea of India, or Partha Chatterjee has presented an idea of India. And here we are going to witness a different India being presented by, not presented, being interpreted by the famous British, essayist Perry Anderson. And what exactly is the idea of India? And friends, is going into the deeper issues here. Is referring to the nationalist movement. And look at the nationalist movement. And for the nationalist movement against the rule of the British in India, it was an article of faith in the Indian National Congress Party. And if you use the words of Gandhi, it is like this. India was one undivided country. India was one undivided land made by nature, in which India was one undivided land made by nature. Perry Anderson puts in single inverted comma. That's a phrase of Gandhi used in Hindu Swaraj. Used in Hindu Swaraj, page number 4041. Page number 4041, Gandhi says this in Hindu Swaraj. What is that? India was one undivided land made by nature, in which we are one nation before they came to India. Before they came to India, ancestrally, indeed, fired with an idea of nationality unknown in other parts of the world, we Indians are one. We Indians are one as no two Englishmen are. Look at the phrases that Gandhi used, friends. You see, Gandhi is portraying in the Indian National Congress an image of India to the Indian masses. And what is the Gandhi's image of India being presented in the Indian National Congress, which uses it to mobilize the masses in India? And what is that phrases Gandhi used? Gandhi is saying, and Perry Anderson is criticizing the historiography of that idea being articulated by Gandhi in Hindu Swaraj and Nehru in Discovery of India. India was one undivided land made by nature, in which we were one nation before they came to India. Before they came to India means British or foreigners. Before they came to India. Ancestrally, indeed, fired with an idea of nationality. That Gandhi is saying that Indians had a sense of nationality. Ancestrally, unknown in other parts of the world. Look at the nationalism Gandhi proposes, that India had a feeling of oneness, a feeling of imagined community, a feeling of brotherhood and sisterhood ancestrally. And we were all nation. We were all part of a nation. And that notion of nation was unknown in other part of the world. And he is belittling other civilizations. He is belittling other civilizations because they don't have a sense of, a notion of what a nation is. That's why Gandhi says, we Indians are one as no two Englishmen are. That means when you compare two Indians vis-a-vis two Englishmen, there may be differences between two Englishmen, but there is no differences between two Indian men. That we Indians are one. as no two Englishmen are. This is what Gandhi said in Hindu Swaraj. I told you the page number. And Perry Anderson further goes to talk about Nehru's vision of India's ancestry, India's antiquity. Nehru's claim of an impress of oneness, which I have already told you in the introductory part of this lecture, that Nehru had an impress of oneness, going back 6,000 years. That Nehru's vision of India goes back to 6,000 years. That India's antiquity begins 6,000 years ago, where from people who inhabited in this territory were always feeling that we are Indians. That is the idea of India. And friends, Perry Anderson further is very critical of Nehru and Gandhi here. Nehru's claim of an impress of oneness going back 6,000 years persisted from pre-war writings like The Unity of India to his final dispute with China. Even during his dispute with China, historians document that to prove that Northeast Frontier Agency, that present Northeast area, the Northeast Frontier area was part of India. That was Nehru's claim before China. When China attacked India, that Northeast Frontier Agency was part of India, and Nehru unhesitantly argued that Northeast India was part of India. And to prove that claim, Anderson says Nehru has even interpreted stories from Mahabharata. That, to his final dispute with China, in which Mahabharata could be invoked by his foreign officers. His foreign officers have invoked stories from Mahabharata as a proof that Northeast Frontier Agency had been part of Mother India, from time immemorial. So, such notions, friends, Perry Anderson is critical of such notions. Such notions have not gone away. Such notions are still here. The facts gainsay them. For example, Anderson is going to be more factual here. The subcontinent, as we know it today. So, we may not agree with Anderson, but we can simply talk about this and discuss also after this lecture, that whether Anderson is right in saying like this, that the subcontinent as we know it today never formed a single political or cultural unit in the pre-modern times. This is what Anderson argues, and you can also ask Anderson for his own historiography for arguing this. What kind of historiography Anderson uses to prove this claim? And what is his claim? He's claiming that, friends, the subcontinent as we know it today never formed a single political or cultural unit in the pre-modern times. For much the longest stretches of its history, its lands were divided between a varying assortment of middle-sized kingdoms of different stripes. He's saying India was never a pan-Indian society. It has been always ruled by varying assortment of middle-sized kingdoms. Throughout its long history, India had different middle-sized kingdoms. Of the three larger empires, we had three larger empires. What are them? The Maurya Empire, the Gupta Empire, and the Mughal Empire. That was the only three empires which united what may be called the idea of India, which created what may be called the idea of India, which the left historians, the centrist historians, as well as the Sangha Parivar historians argue that was the real India, which the Maurya Empire, the Mughal Empire, Mughal Empire, they have differences for the Sangha Parivar, Maurya Empire, and the Gupta Empire, which created a pan-India. And Anderson is saying that in discovery of India, which argues that India had been here, the feeling of oneness had been here, the feeling of a nation had been here for almost 6,000 years or more, which Nehru makes a tall claim that which was not even matched by the Maurya and Mughal control of India. And Gupta control was considerably less. And the Maurya control of India and the Mughal control of India extended from contemporary Afghanistan, the present day Afghanistan, that ended by below the Deccan area. That empire ended. That from present day Afghanistan to the present day Deccan area, that Andhra Pradesh, that area, that empire ended, and that empire never has come to South India. Which one? The Maurya Empire, the Chandragupta Maurya, the Samudragupta Empire, the Chandragupta Maurya Empire, friends, and the Mughal Akbar Empire. So that didn't come to South India. That ended by Deccan. But that began from Afghanistan. And and when it comes to Guptas never had such a vast empire, according to Perry Anderson. And friends, Anderson again says the Maurya, Mughal, and Gupta never came near to Manipur. These empires never came near to Manipur. So friends, separated by intervals of 500 and 1,000 years, there was no remembered political or cultural connection between these orders. So, friends, Anderson saying the idea of India is essentially a European idea, not a local Indian idea. The idea of India was, in fact, invented by foreigners, not the Indians. Indians never had an idea of India. You can criticize Anderson for this argument, this sort type of an argument. On what historiography Anderson is saying this. So, but where Anderson is proposing that the idea of India was essentially a European idea, not a local invention. Friends, if this idea wasn't here, friends, how can we love Bengalis? How can we love Northeast Indians? How can we love the Biharis? How can we love the Kashmiris? This idea was here. But Anderson is arguing that the idea of India was essentially a European idea, that Indians never had invented such a notion since antiquity. For example, this term India, there was no such a term ever existed in India in any of the literature Indians produced or equivalent in the local or indigenous languages of India. India is a Greek coinage. Anderson claims India is a Greek coinage taken from the Indus River. It is taken from the Indus River. And so it was so exogenous to the Indian subcontinent. This term was so much exogenous to the Indian subcontinent that as late as the 16th century, up to 16th century, the idea of India was unknown to Indians, people living in this subcontinent. And Europeans used the word India or Indians simply to refer all natives of an unknown country, just like Europeans say the Americans. When Europeans say the Americans, they may refer to people living in the American continent, North America or South America or Central America. These are all, Americans. But there are Brazil, Argentina, Panama, Nicaragua or Canada or Mexicans, but they are all part of Americas. Just like that, Europeans use the word Indians to refer all the types of people who are living beyond the Hindu Kush mountain. Just like that. So this is not, a pan-Indian notion of, notion of India. When the British arrived, friends, that's why, friends, when British arrived, the sprawling heterogeneity here allowed the Britain to swiftly and easily control this territory because they were not united. India was not united. India was not a nation at all. Just like in the way Nehru claims in Discovery of India or Gandhi claims in Hindu Swaraj or International Movement claimed. That's why Britain used one local power against another local power. Thereby, it formed a series of alliances and annexations. Therefore, Britain established a pan-Indian empire. And this pan-Indianness is actually, according to Perry Anderson's interpretation, is not a contribution of the freedom movement. It is a contribution of the British Raj. It was the British Raj who created a notion of India. That cemented that notion of India. And the notion of India actually was used by Europeans to refer people living in the Indian subcontinent, but not as a nation. Just like they are using the word Americans to refer all the people living in the American part of the world. And friends, this distinct and different communities and dynasties, kingdoms existed here, which had no unity and oneness, that made Britain so easy to annex these territories and build an empire here that continued till the Battle of Plassey. With the Battle of Plassey, which happened in the present day Bengal, by which Britain constructed an empire that extended further the south and further the east, if not the northwest, but it further its empire to the east and to the south. So historically, the first pan-Indian empire was founded not by the Mughals, not by the Guptas, not by the Mauryas. It was founded by Britain because British Empire extended to south as well as the east. And no predecessors can claim this heritage. So India's segmented society and denationalized governments did not constitute a serious challenge to the British Raj in India. And Anderson proposed this argument by referring to a local Indian historian named B.B. Misra. B.B. Misra has written a book, The Unification and Division of India, and he referred to the page number 64. In page number 64, by B.B. Misra, The Unification Divisions of India, Anderson is saying that the segmented and denationalized governments did not constitute a serious challenge to the British. Indian troops conquered the country for the British. It's interesting, friends, that the Indians which Gandhi talked about, which Nehru talked about, which the freedom movement talked about, was in fact fighting for British government and helping them annex India. If you are a country, if you are a pan-Indian nation, how could your own people make alliance with Britain and help Britain annex other territories in the Indian subcontinent? So that means this notion of India was not here. Foreign conquerors were a novelty in the subcontinent. Anderson says foreign conquerors were a novelty into the Indian subcontinent, because from time immemorial, people living here always confronted foreigners. And particularly from 10th century onwards, Indians had been always confronting foreigners. And the British, they were the last to come. Not last, the first to come, Britain. East India Company came to India in 16th century, 1600, I think. So many, the British were not necessarily more alien than the previous rulers. The British were not necessarily more alien than the previous rulers. So the British were also aliens to the Indian subcontinent. Therefore, Britain required more their own soldiers, not the Indian soldiers. So for a century after the seizure of Bengal, sepoys in the command of the East India Company outnumbered whites 6-1. There were 6 sepoys in the Indian in the British Indian Army compared to 1 British soldier. So that was the ratio between white colored soldier and the Indian soldiers. So 6-1. And why Britain used so many sepoys in the Indian army? Because this land was so unfamiliar to Britain. To understand the local culture, the local custom, they required more local people, because the ethnic, linguistic, dynastic, social, confessional differences, Britain required more native people into their army. That's why by the time Bengal was seized in the Plassey, the number of Indians in the ratio of Indians in the British army was 6-1. For 1 British soldier, there were 6 Indian soldiers. But friends, the mutiny of 18 mutiny, it's a contested vocabulary. It's only British historians say the mutiny. For Sanghaparivar literature, it is the first war of independence. For especially Savarkar says it is first war of independence. But anyway, Perry Anderson uses the word mutiny, which we may also object. We can't say it is a mutiny because we are all proud of our nation. So Anderson, with your permission, I am using the word the mutiny. The mutiny of 1857 was a severe shock to Britain. With a severe shock to Britain. Why? Because, there were 6 Indian soldiers for 1 British soldier in the British Indian Army. And when soldiers within the British Army create a tension, that will be a big problem to the British Raj in India. Therefore, the mutiny of 1857 was an eye-opener for Britain. Thereafter, the policy of the Raj changed. So they tried to reduce the ratio from 2-1. The 2 Indian soldiers for 1 British soldier after the 1857 incident. And the Wood was the Secretary of State for India. The then Secretary of State for India, Wood, made his objective very clear. I wish to have a different and rival spirit in different regiments, so that 6 may fire into Hindu, Gurkhas into either, without any scruple in case of need. That their priority was that Indian men in the British army should not hesitate to shoot or fire arms against Indians. That the Sikh man in the British army should not hesitate to fire arms against a Hindu man. And a Gurkha man in the Indian army should never hesitate to shoot or fire arms against Hindus or Sikhs. So the Indian army, comprising a peacetime strength of some 200 to 250,000 during peacetime. The Indian army was the largest employer in the Raj and absorbed a third to a half of its revenue. That half of the revenue of the British Raj was spent for this massive employment sector, the army of the Raj. So it was regularly deployed overseas. It constituted, in Salisbury's famous words, Perry Anderson quotes Salisbury's famous words, a British barrack in the Oriental Seas, a British barrack in the Oriental Seas, from which we may draw any number of troops without paying for them. Without paying for them. So friends, its services included, the services of the British Army included provision of soldiers for imperial expansion in the Middle East. Indian Army was used for expansion in the Middle East. Africa, Indian Army was used. Southeast Asia, and cannon fodder on a heroic scale in the First World War. But its primary function remained domestic intimidation, the maintenance of British rule by a threat or exercise of force in India. To maintain a British Raj was the primary function of the Indian Army, which was basically comprised of Indian men. After the 1857 incident, the ratio was 2-1. Before that, by the time of Plassey War, it was 6-1. 6 Indian men for 1 British soldier. So friends, by this, Perry Anderson is starting his essay to criticize the Nehru version of Indianness or the idea of India and the Gandhi version of the idea of India, or the International Movement's idea of India, and he never agreed any of the arguments of these 3 actors of the freedom movement, but he had a respect for one person, and according to Perry Anderson, the one and only freedom fighter who had a real notion of India, that India should be united, that Sikh man, the Bengalis, or the Gurkhas, the South Indians, the North Indians, all should be united into one force, was, according to him, the real nationalist in India was not Gandhi nor Nehru, it was Subhash Chandra Bose. And he had a great respect for Subhash Chandra Bose, which we will discuss in the next lecture. It's a very long essay, friends. It takes time to finish. I will try to present key arguments. And the rest of the part you are expected to read, friends. So in tomorrow's lecture, this is just an introduction. This just an introduction to the independence chapter of Perry Anderson. Tomorrow I will give you a brief portrait of Perry Anderson's idea of independence in this essay, friends. And now floor is open for discussion, friends. We will continue next day.